Hi, I'm Chuck Linick. I'm a reenactor, and for 36 years I used to use living history in the classroom to bring the subject to life for my students. But I'm not in the classroom anymore, so what I'm doing is I'm now utilizing what I've picked up over 36 years of teaching and with living history and all the garb that I've collected over the years and my passion for bringing the past to life, and I'm applying them to different parts of history that I didn't really get to explore as part of my curriculum. Currently I'm taking a deep dive into California history, of the 19th century. And in starting that, I ended up covering the missions, the assistencias, those are spin-off missions, or were intended to be, the Presidios. And then, while studying one of the missions, I stumbled across a number of famous outlaws and bandidos who had actually passed through one of the missions and actually one of the saloons there. And I got intrigued. And so what I've been doing lately is chasing bandidos and lawmen. And I've covered, the biggies so far in California, Joaquin Murrieta and Solomon Pico, who was a partner sometimes, and Tiburcio Vazquez, who's always rated right behind Murrieta as far as bloodthirstiness, and decided to just continue this. Well, my journey has brought me back to the San Luis Obispo area, and this is me tracking down a gang known as the Jack Powers Pio Linares gang. Sometimes you hear the names reversed. And the reason I'm dressed like this, a lot of this has to do with vigilante movements. So we're going to be hearing about these particular outlaws and the vigilantes who hunted them, and I hope you stick with me on my journey. Following the conclusion of the Mexican War, California is now given to the United States, and any of the old boundaries that had existed before in California, those are pretty much going away, and California is going to be divided up into 27 counties. San Luis Obispo, the pueblo that grows out of this mission, ends up becoming one of them. And a whole slate of officers are elected, including law enforcement officials. One of those elected officials is going to be the sheriff, Henry Daly. And Mr. Daly, he's a ranchero, he's very prosperous. And he is going to be paid the sum of $20 a month to serve as the sheriff. He's going to rent out 3 rooms. I think they were the ones down at the farther end. And one of those rooms would serve as his office, another would serve as a courtroom, and I believe a third one served as a jail. I want you to understand something. The population of the entire county of San Luis Obispo in 1850 was about 337. After 1 year, Daly resigned. He said the job was too dangerous. I don't know if it was about the 337 people that lived in the county, or it might have been the influx of miners following the Camino Real and eventually heading up into gold country. But this particular area earned a reputation. There was a nickname given to the pueblo, Barrio del Tigre, or Tiger Town. And that kind of gives you an idea of the danger aspect. So he's out of it. Through the 1850s, the coastal counties between San Jose and San Diego were commonplace scenes of robbery and murder. El Camino Real, the road of the Padres connecting the 21 now secularized missions, soon developed a reputation as the most lawless trail in the West. You have to understand that, with the rising population, yeah, things got a bit hairy as far as enforcing the law, but San Luis Obispo was nowhere near the size of San Francisco, because San Francisco just became huge once the gold rush started, and obviously there weren't enough law enforcement personnel. And so what ended up happening is citizens took up positions of their own where they formed committees of vigilance, the vigilantes, and they often took matters into their own hands. And so they would step in to supplement the forces of the law, or maybe enforce their own sort of justice. And there was an idea that common justice or majority rule justice was better than no justice at all. In this atmosphere of growing racial tensions, you're going to see the rise of the Bandidos. And part of this was a result of Anglo-Americans coming in, enforcing their laws, making Californios try to prove their claims to land grants that were either given under Mexican law or under Spanish law. And often those that would be trying to make the claims for their lands, it would take forever. It could take something like 17 years, if you were unlucky. And a lot of times what would end up happening is the legal costs would force someone, even if they won, they would have to sell off some of their lands in order to pay off those legal debts. And so there was a lot of tension that was growing, and a number of the Bandidos either saw themselves as Robin Hood figures. Later, they're going to be compared to the character Zorro, and that they were fighting the good fight, and that they were supported by the people because they were trying to stand up for them. Joaquin Murrieta first began committing his crimes in 1850, and his Five Joaquins gang terrorized the state, provoking California Governor John Bigler to pass the Ranger Act, which authorized a company of mounted rangers to kill or capture the bandits. Solomon Pico is another one who could be one of those Zorro figures, and he's going to be haunting the hills south of San Luis Obispo that are later going to bear his name, the Solomon Hills. And he ended up striking against travelers coming down El Camino Real, and often bodies or skeletons would be found in the bushes where people had disappeared. And this went on for a couple of years, and then there was a male rider that was killed going between Monterey and Los Angeles. He was killed in the lower Salinas Valley. And vigilantes in San Luis Obispo rode out, and they captured a group of men that they were certain had done it and hauled them in, and one of those people was Solomon Pico. Well, what ended up happening is Pico got let go because his family connections. One of his cousins was Pio Pico, the last Mexican governor. One of them was Andres Pico, who had led Mexican forces in California, so he had connections. And other Californios were let go. There was only one person that ended up being kept, who was unable to make bail or did not even have bail dismissed, and that was an Anglo-American. And what ended up happening is a lynch mob broke in and hung him from one of the doors, or the door of the jail. So that'd be like one of the doors here. I want you to think about this, because this is the Mission San Luis Obispo, which was secularized at the time. They hung somebody from a mission. This sent a very clear message to Solomon Pico, and he fled. He went south to Los Angeles. He didn't want anything to do with this place. Well, the remnants of his gang floated around, and then they were eventually absorbed by Jack Powers and Pio Linares, and they had this gang formed in secret. And there's usually a debate as to whose name goes first. I usually see that Powers is in charge, so I'm putting his name first. But this brings us to Pio Linares, who lived in the area as a Californio. So we got to talk about him first. Pio Linares was also a Californio, heir to Victor Pantaleon Linares, a prominent citizen of Alta California and amongst the largest recipients of Mexican land grants in Alta California. In 1834, Mexico had decided to end the mission system and sell all the lands. The lands were divided into smaller ranchos and sold to Mexican citizens who were helpful during the War for Independence. In 1842, Victor Linares had been granted Ranchito de Santa Fe, 1,000 varas square lot, basically 165 acres, within the Pueblo lands of San Luis Obispo by Governor Juan Bautista Alvarado, and was also granted the Rancho Cañada de los Osos. That rancho lay west of San Luis Obispo to Morro Bay in the Los Osos Valley, between the Irish Hills to the south and the Nine Sisters to the north. However, ownership was split between the elder Linares and three other well-known citizens, James Scott, John Wilson, and Francisco Badillo. 4 years later, after the last Mexican governor of Alta California, Pio Pico, declared the mission buildings themselves for sale, sold everything except the church, and the elder Linares, the former soldado and now ranchero, was appointed mayordomo of Mission San Luis Obispo and judge of San Luis Obispo. When the county government for the brand new county of San Luis Obispo was elected, a man named Jesus Luna was made one of the two justices of the peace. Okay, what does this have to do with Tiger Town or with Pio Linares? Well, I'm standing at the intersection of Monterey and Chorro streets. So there's the mission over there. On one of these other corners, Jesus Luna had a building which included a Fandango Hall, it had a cafe, and it also had a shop of his. He wasn't just making money off of these endeavors, he was using his position as Justice of the Peace to tax miners that were coming up from Mexico, and they'd be coming up to Camino Real, and custom often dictated that they stop here at the mission and pray. Well, Mr. Luna felt that it would be better if the people paid him a tax, and usually there were about 100 miners at a time that were coming up, so he was getting a bit of money. And what he ended up doing is he made it pretty much mandatory. He hired a number of constables, and their job was to see that anybody who was trying to get around paying the tax could be arrested. There were a number of people that tried to avoid the situation, and they would try passing San Luis Obispo to the east, and those people could be arrested, they could be detained, and of course they could be fined. And one of those people was Pio Linares, who ended up staying in that position until Luna left his job. All right, now we can turn to Jack Powers. He was born John A. Power in Ireland, and at the age of 9, he and his family emigrated to New York. He was 19 when the Mexican War began in 1846, and he, his brother, a brother-in-law, and a number of his friends volunteered. They enlisted, and when they arrived in California, they were told that they would be given land at the conclusion of the war. Well, that didn't really happen, but Powers hung out anyway, or rather Power hung out anyway in Santa Barbara. At first, Power tried his hand at gambling, then went north to the mines in order to get gold, and he wasn't too good at that. He then went to San Francisco and joined a criminal gang known as the Hounds, who were notoriously anti-immigrant. After a particularly violent attack on a Chilean mining camp, what ended up happening is Power and a number of others were arrested. The charges were dropped, and Power then ended up drifting around the state as a gambler before returning to Santa Barbara. So Power became quite the man about town. He gambled a lot in Santa Barbara. He also raced horses. Sometimes Powers operated on the right side of the law. He was known to have led a couple of posses, once to recover stolen horses and capture a couple of horse thieves. Another time he escorted prisoners to their trial. At one point, he went to a fandango, insulted the ladies of a rather wealthy California family, and their male relatives took exception to this, took him outside, and he was stabbed quite severely. Then he decided, as he was healing up, I need to live a quieter life, a more honest life. What he did is he ended up finding an abandoned building, moved in, and decided he was going to set up a rancho for raising hogs. There's a bit of a problem though. That building and that land belonged to Richard Den, who was one of the big landowners with his brother in the area of Santa Barbara. They purchased land from the Mission, or former Mission lands of Santa Barbara. They also purchased the former Asistencia San Marcos, which is on the other side of the San Marcos Cuesta or Pass. And there was a big, ugly lawsuit which went on for about a year. And at the end of it, it was determined that Den owned the land and Powers had to get out. Well, now an eviction notice is going to be served, and there is a sheriff named William Twist who he's going to go serve the papers. And Powers is not leaving. He has decided that's his land. He was supposed to be given land at the end of the Mexican War. He's taking that land. And what ended up happening is the sheriff had to raise a posse of about 200 guys, and Powers has his own followers. And when Sheriff Twist showed up, he's wounded severely, kills his attacker. By the way, Twist had also served in the same regiment as Powers. One of Powers' people, who had also been a veteran of that regiment and was, he was backing up Powers, he ends up getting killed in the ensuing gunfight. And people call a timeout, and what happens is there's a compromise. They're going to let Powers harvest his crop, move his stock, and then he has to get out. Following his loss of the rancho, Powers continued living in Santa Barbara County, leasing a part of the Rancho Laguna in the Guadalupe Valley in the north of the county, abandoning pig farming and living by gambling and racing horses as before. After Powers had been evicted from the Santa Barbara area, and after he'd kind of finished up doing whatever he was doing in the Guadalupe area, he ended up gathering the remnants of Solomon Pico's gang, and he gathered them together in secret. And what would end up happening is he would hang out in the various billiard halls and gambling houses that were along Monterey and Chorro and Higuera streets, right near the Mission, also right near Jesus Luna's Fandango Hall and Cafe, hoping to overhear juicy tidbits. And as I say, he was hanging out with Linares. He was also hanging out with someone going by the name of Joaquin Valenzuela, who was one of the 5 Joaquins in Murrieta's gang. Except that this isn't the real Joaquin Valenzuela. This is his brother Jesus. Jesus has adopted the name of his brother who was killed by California Rangers. Which I'm still trying to figure out why he would choose his dead brother's name as an alias. But what they would do is they would basically listen in, and this is at a time where cattle is big business. It isn't a big business as far as the hides and the tallow, but during the gold rush, it's about selling meat, to the mining camps. And often buyers would come from the mining camps up north, and they would come down the Camino Real, and they would be carrying either gold dust or ingots that were called octagonals that were worth about $50 each. And these folks then started disappearing, like a lot, like at least one a month. It happened again. I have too much stuff. I hope you stick with me on my journey.